Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the new Virginia Alternate Assessment Program, VAAP, Participation Decision-Making Tool, Information for Families of Students with Disabilities. We are so pleased today to have Brittany Vigil and Sarah Khalif from the from the Office of Special Education Instruction at FCPS. I will turn it over to both of you. Take it away.
Hello and good morning. Thank you to all of our families who are here to learn more with us about the new Virginia Alternate Assessment Program, the VAAP Participation Decision-Making Tool. I'm joined here today with my fantastic specialists, Sarah and Michelle, who will introduce themselves to you in a moment. Today, we're going to overview and share background information with you regarding the changes around the VAAP participation criteria form, as well as information on the individualized education program team's implementation of the new tool at the IEP meeting. Some highlights from the webinar today: you are going to learn about significant cognitive learning disabilities, implications of VAAP participation on your child, and you're going to learn about the new VAAP decision-making tool. And so before we move on, I am going to have my specialists introduce themselves, and we'll start with Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Henry. I'm one of the specialists on this team, and we're looking forward to meeting with you today.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Khalif. I am also one of the specialists on this team, and I will be kicking off our presentation with you this morning. So during this presentation, we will be covering the following objectives. What is the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program, or the VAAP? Why the VAAP participation criteria form has changed, and an introduction to the new VAAP participation decision-making tool. When determining participation in Virginia's accountability system, all students with disabilities must first be considered for participation in the SOL, Standards of Learning Assessments. A student's IEP or 504 plan must specify the student's participation in the state accountability system as follows: participation in the Standards of Learning test with no accommodations, participation in the Standards of Learning test with accommodations, or participation in the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program, the VAAP. The Every Student Succeeds Act allows states to provide an alternate assessment for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. However, it does not define the term significant cognitive disabilities, and it does limit participation to less than 1% of the general population of students. It is important to note that not every individual with a cognitive disability fits within the 1% criteria or meets the criteria of a significant cognitive disability. So let's take a moment to read through the information provided regarding the Every Student Succeeds Act that's on your screen. All right. Our next slide also is just a continuation of the last slide. So just take a moment to continue reading the information outlined by the Every Student Succeeds Act in this slide as well. All right. Now that you have a little bit of background about the Every Student Succeeds Act, let's learn a little bit more about the VAAP. So the VAAP is an alternative assessment based on alternate achievement standards, and it is specifically designed to evaluate the achievement of students with the most significant cognitive disabilities in grades 3 through 8 and high school. The VAAP participants are instructed in the academic standards called Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning, or the VSOLs, that are available in reading, mathematics, and science. The VSOL were developed from the Virginia Standards of Learning, the SOLs, and have been reduced in depth, breadth, and complexity to make the content relevant, accessible, and appropriate for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Students who participate in VAAP are on the Applied Studies Diploma track. A couple other important things to know about the VAAP are that significant cognitive disability is not a category under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. Identifying a significant cognitive disability is not solely determined by an IQ test score, nor based on a specific disability category, but rather on a holistic understanding of the complex needs of a student. Additionally, participation in the alternate assessment involves students who have a most significant cognitive disability that impacts both intellectual ability and adaptive functioning, sometimes called daily living skills. These students will have intellectual functioning and adaptive skills well below average, and other characteristics must also be considered beyond standardized test scores. So now that we know what the VAAP is, how might a student participate? To help maintain critical focus on educational equity and excellence for all students as permitted by the ESSA, only students with the most significant cognitive disabilities are eligible to be assessed using an alternate assessment aligned with alternate academic achievement standards. Eligibility for VAAP participation is determined by the student's IEP team using the VAAP participation decision-making tool annually. In the last slide, I shared that only those students with the most significant cognitive disabilities are eligible to participate in VAAP. The decision about if a student should participate might be a difficult conversation, as everyone comes to the table with the best intent for the student. Take a moment to look at this slide to review a little bit closer what a significant cognitive disability is. Okay. On the next slide, on this slide, you'll see that when considering the decision to participate in VAAP, it is important for teams to take into account the factors above. So an IEP team is not making a decision for a student to participate in VAAP based on these factors. These factors have also become a part of the new VAAP decision-making tool, which you will see shortly. Okay. As a parent, there are some ramifications to students participating in the VAAP assessment, and these are the most important things to take into consideration when making a decision about whether your child meets the qualifications. For some students, this is appropriate. For some students, they might need more time to have access and opportunities to access the general education curriculum before this decision should be made. Some of the short-term ramifications are that students' instruction is decreased in depth, breadth, and complexity than the instruction of other students. Long-term ramifications may include that the student will not meet the requirements for the standard or advanced studies diploma. And longer-term ramifications are that the student may not be eligible for some post-secondary training institutions, military service, or jobs. The Applied Studies Diploma is a diploma option available to students identified as having a disability who complete the requirements of their IEP and meet certain requirements prescribed by the Board of Education pursuant to regulations, but do not meet the requirements for any named diploma. Some limitations of the Applied Studies diploma are that it is not equivalent to a standard diploma. It's difficult to change to other diploma options once it is pursued. It may not qualify a student for a higher education, federal financial aid, and some employment opportunities. And students are eligible for VAAP through the age of 22. So why is there a new criteria form? It's important to note the VAAP participation criteria has not changed, only the form to support deeper discussion and more informed decision-making around the VAAP has changed. This was driven by Virginia's data regarding IEP teams' VAAP participation decision-making and requests from local educational agencies for additional guidance and resources to support informed decision-making. Remember, the VAAP assessment is intended for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, which makes up 1% of a school division or less. Fairfax County Schools has not exceeded the participation and had a solid foundation in place for IEP teams to make strong, informed decisions regarding eligibility for VAAP. We will continue as a county to build upon the foundations in place and use the tool to continue to inform decision-making for VAAP participation. The intent of the tool is to guide and support IEP teams in determining whether a student is most appropriately assessed using Virginia's alternate assessment. The Virginia Department of Education, in consultation with parents, teachers, administrators, and other stakeholders. You are important members of an IEP team and play a vital role in the process. Collaboration between parents and guardians and the school team is important for student success. While the foundation of determining assessments is an IEP decision, the student must meet all participation criteria, and it needs to be a defendable decision, meaning there has to be data to support the decision. If you have private data, please share that with the IEP team, as that information may also be considered in the decision-making process. In our next slides, we will walk you through the new VAAP decision-making tool. The new tool is organized into 4 criteria sections. These sections directly align to the previous criteria eligibility questions. Again, the criteria has not changed, just the tool used at IEP meetings has.
As the IEP team works through each of the 4 steps in the process, it will be important to document data which was used to make the decisions. As a reminder, when considering whether or not the VAAP is an appropriate assessment for your child, the IEP team must consider multiple sources of data. The data sources may include, but are not limited to, the sources listed in this slide. Data could include research-based intervention data history, formal and informal assessment results, learning characteristics of your child, assistive technology evaluations or assessment data, current or recent IEP documentation, support services in progress, again, information that you have from home, observations. Data is anything that you are bringing to the table that's going to support this decision. So when we look at the tool starts off with question 1, which is asking us, does this student have a current IEP? And hopefully, if you're going through this process with your IEP team, your child does have an IEP. In question 2, we notice it states categories that very rarely will be present if a student has a significant cognitive disability. As we look at the disabilities which may be considered, keep in mind that these are not automatic. So there are certain categories where if a student only has a speech or language impairment, and that's the only disability category that they're being served under, typically they are not a student who's going to meet the participation criteria for VAAP if that is their only disability category. They might have that in addition to something else. Other disability categories are more typical where we would see a student who would meet the participation criteria. such as intellectual disability or autism. But that also doesn't mean that if you have an intellectual disability, you automatically meet the participation criteria for VAAP. So we have many students who have autism or an intellectual disability who do not meet the participation criteria. So again, this decision is not solely made on the disability category of the student. So what data sources are we used when making a decision for Section A? The IEP team is going to look at evaluation data, eligibility data, and the special education eligibility form that has been used at the most recent eligibility. And you'll summarize the conversation in the summary to talk through what that looks like for your child. After you look at the initial eligibility for your child, the next section is Section B, determining the most significant cognitive disability. In this section, IEP teams will select the most applicable row, which best describes the student's daily functioning for each of the adaptive skill domains: the conceptual domain, the social domain, and the practical domain. Students with a most significant cognitive disability will have significant deficits in all adaptive skill domains. As a reminder, the IEP team will need to document the data sources used when completing the Section B summary. And one thing to note is as you're going through this as an IEP team, it's important that the IEP team reads each row from top to bottom. And so the IEP team, as you can see on the screen, you'll see conceptual 1, 2, 3, 4, social 1, 2, 3, 4, practical 1, 2, 3, 4. And so what you do is you read the criteria for, let's say, practical 1, and you determine if that criteria meets the profile of your child based on the data. And then you continue to read down until you find the criteria that best matches your student. And so there are going to be cases where the IEP team may be stuck between two rows. And so if the IEP team is stuck between two rows, VDOE would like us to presume competence. This is the opportunity to advocate for your child. When talking through the tool, you want to share what you were seeing at home and in the community. In the absence of a clear choice between two of the rows, it is more beneficial to your child to assume that they can do more rather than do less and choose the row above. So the decision about which row and characteristics should capture your child holistically. Again, we really want to take all of your child into account when we're making these decisions in each section and find that criteria that matches your child's functioning and advocate for what you're seeing. After Section B, you'll go to Section C. In this section, the IEP team selects the most applicable row that best describes the student's needs for each area: curriculum, instruction, assessment and accommodation and modifications, and assistive technology. After making a determination, the data used to guide the determination will be included in the summary. And in this section, you utilize that same idea of presuming competence in each of these areas. Finally, you'll get to Section D of the decision-making tool. And Section D of the decision-making tool has some additional considerations to think about. The first part of Section D looks at these categories, and these should look familiar because Sarah talked to you about these a little bit earlier in the presentation. The IEP team's decision to have the student participate in the alternate assessment is made after reviewing the entire decision-making tool and the collection of student-specific evidence used in sections A, B, and C. The final decision to participate in the alternate assessment is not made based solely on any of the following considerations. So the IEP team at this point is agreeing that we are not making this decision solely because of a disability category. We're not making this decision solely because there's poor attendance or extended absences. We're not making this VAAP participation decision based solely on academic or other services that the student receives or the percentage of time that they are receiving those services. Again, if the IEP team determines that student participation is based solely on one of the factors in Section D, then the IEP team would not proceed further and they would not be eligible. So this is just making sure that we're looking at all of the data we have holistically and not making a determination because of one thing listed in this area. Once it has been documented that the student met the criteria for participation in VAAP, the IEP team must verify that yes, the student is eligible to participate in the VAAP, or no, the student is not eligible to participate in the VAAP. Additionally, in this portion, it does have the IEP team agree that if the student is eligible to participate in VAAP, that they do understand that this impacts the type of diploma that the student is eligible to receive. And that goes back to those implications that we talked about earlier with the Applied Studies diploma. VDOE has several resources available to parents on their website, and we have linked the resources related to the VAAP, the Applied Studies diploma, and additional diploma options here. And these will be available to you when the presentation is sent out to you next week. Additionally, FCPS also has information on their public website available to parents. We have linked the resources for the VAAP decision-making tools. That IEP 316 form is the copy of the actual tool that will be used at the IEP meeting, the graduation requirements, and the post-secondary options for students earning an Applied Studies diploma. And before we jump into some questions, please know that we want success for all of our students, regardless of the type of assessment they are taking or the diploma